Welcome to the show. How are you, Russell?
I'm good. I'm good. Looking forward to tonight, our conversation tonight.
Yes. One of your specialties, let's say, is helping people with anger issues, children, adults, years of experience with humans who you helped with your tools. And this is a question I hear a lot because it's a common thing to say, okay, stay calm, you're going to make things worse. And imagine an argument at work or a football game where a player has been fouled and then, is getting angry. And the question is anger always negative?
No, not at all. Anger can be useful. It can be healthy in the right place. But to answer that in full, anger is and can be negative at times, depending on what sort of anger, because we can have healthy anger and we can have unhealthy anger. So if someone's in danger and they are being threatened or their loved ones, then it would be appropriate, wouldn't it, to be angry about that. I don't think anyone would judge anyone if someone broke into their house, and that's justified anger. But when it affects the lives of yourself or the life of yourself or your loved ones, and it impacts the quality of your life, then that anger needs to be looked at.
So we have ascertained that there is positive and negative anger, and you have dealt with many people with anger issues. What is the common trait that you find in people? Like, I'm gonna use a very strong word. Is always violence in their exteriorization of anger? Or there are other traits that you recognize? I mean, 30 years of experience and more, and you've seen different cases. So what are the common traits?
Yeah, well, there's a small majority of the public that suffer with IED, which is an explosive disorder, which is at the extreme. So intermittent explosive disorder or impulse disorder is where people are very, very violent and they have outbursts and they're triggered really easily and usually on a daily basis. But they are the minority. And then we have anger issues where they're not necessarily violent to other people or not physically violent, but they can be angry in non-physical ways. You can be abusive. You can be abusive in the way you talk to people and the way you interact with them. But you can also be angry with yourself. We can internalize anger. Many people that I work with, they internalize their own anger, and they sometimes have a belief that anger is wrong, and yet they trigger their own anger through their thoughts, and then they feel guilt about being angry and they try to suppress it. And then there are others that use something called passive aggression. I'll give you an example of passive aggression. It's when you can, let's say you're with your partner and you had an argument and you feel the argument is finished and moved on, and you say, "You're okay," and they go, "I'm fine, just leave me alone." So they're not fine. Their body language and the way they're feeling, it's not congruent with what they're saying. They're not fine at all, but they're being passive aggressive. So you've got different levels. So there is healthy anger and there is unhealthy anger. The people that I tend to meet are finding that their anger is becoming a problem within their families and affecting their partners or their employees or fellow employees or their children even. And so they usually own it. They will come in and say, I have an anger issue, or someone will ring me and say, "Look, I think my partner has an anger issue and I'm thinking of introducing him to you. Do you think you can help?" So to go back to your original question, anger doesn't have to be violent. It can be internalized, or it can be that sort of anger where you walk away and punch the pillow. You're not punching anyone. You're getting frustrated with your own self, and you hide away and you're violent in a secret, but whether you're angry, externalize anger, or whether you internalize it, it's just as unhealthy for the body.
Yeah. If you think about the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius already was talking about the damage, about how anger can be harmful. And there is an interesting article on Journal of Medicine of 2010. The link is in the notes, where there are presented some of the health risks that hostility, anger, and aggressiveness could cause. What are those? I mean, is that true that we are damaging our body and mind just because we are angry?
I've been working with people for about 35 years with emotions. And I can categorically tell you now that anger is responsible for a lot of medical conditions, IBS, teeth grinding, and then we get to the more serious problems like coronary heart disease. A bout of anger can actually suppress your immune system for up to 6 hours. So if you're having anger every day or outbursts and your immune system is getting suppressed, then you're prone to more illness and disease. So, and that's not to mention things like bullying behavior and relationship problems, and it can lead to depression. The list is endless. A lot of people, they think I'm a very good guesser or I'm mind reading, but when I ask them when they come in and say, I've got an anger issue, I'd like to work with you on this, I will ask them if not the young people, but if they've had old anger for decades and they're 35, 40, 50, etc., then they will have a lot of these medical conditions like high blood pressure, digestive problems. And so I've seen it over the years. I've seen some very extreme cases, and they personally attribute, and they say, yeah, I think it was my anger that caused this.
Let me tell you this. In my line of business as a fighter pilot instructor or a triathlon coach, I find people, young adults, who let go to frustration initially and anger afterwards in many different situations. Like, for example, if you have a pilot that does the maneuver wrong, and it didn't come out as expected, or a combat mission which didn't sort out the wanted result, basically their goals are not achieved. Same in sport. In sport happens, like you have expectation for a race, and then it comes out that you don't achieve it, and now you're angry, and then the next race is even worse because you're not focused. So I'm curious always to see which tools I can use to turn anger into a positive push, and kind of let burn that fire to propel and push through the frustration. So, it's curious how the thoughts they lead to a block, because in the end, anger becomes a block. I have the story when I was playing tennis. I was breaking rackets because I was getting angry, and then when I finished my rackets, I quit playing tennis. This is kind of metaphor of life. Now you've broken all the rackets, you cannot play tennis anymore. This is the block. So how it happens in the mind that these thoughts are leading to anger, and now we are basically creating limitations to our potential.
Well, let's use your example of your days when you were breaking the rackets in tennis. So anyone that has anger will be thinking in a certain way. So when I'm working with anybody who has anger issues, I look to the triggers. So what triggered you in that situation? Well, probably you didn't play well, or you didn't play the ball or serve the ball effectively or in the way you wanted to. So you would have a rule in your mind: I must play a certain way. I must play a perfect shot, or I must win the shot, or whatever it is. There's usually a must, should, or have to. And then if it doesn't go to plan and it doesn't happen the way you must make it happen, then it would go to another level of thought, like, this is terrible, I can't cope, it's awful, and it proves I'm no good. So than the action of anger. And that's no dissimilar to someone coming in who's having domestic problems at home, where they're getting angry or they're losing themselves to their emotions at work. They always have very strong musts, shoulds, and have tos. And what I mean by that, they have a code of conduct, rules. And if these rules are thought strongly and they say, this must happen a certain way, or this person must not speak to me that way, or I must not be treated like that. The stronger the must or the stronger the should, then the more the disturbance is, or the more the anger is when someone doesn't abide by those rules. And when someone has anger with themselves, then they've actually broken their own rules. So they say, I must not do this. And when they do it, they can get angry with themselves. So the first line of thought, the first there's a trigger, the thing that happens. In your case, it was in tennis, the ball gets played wrongly. Or if I bring it into family environment, that my rules in the house must happen a certain way. So when they don't happen, where's your coping strategy? There isn't one. So if you think about, if you have this strong must or should, or even mustn't or should not, then when people break those rules or you break them yourself, where's the coping? So people who don't get angry, and there are many, that don't, they get annoyed. Have you ever met anyone in life where something happens and they tell you about it and they're laughing about it, and you hear what they've said, and you say to them, if that was me, I think I would have blown my top. Or if that was me, I don't think I could have taken it the way that you have. So if you look at the human race, if you've got 100 people to experience something and they all experience the same thing, let's say someone shouted at them, how many would get angry? Have a guess.
I don't have a figure. You have a percentage?
No, I don't actually. It's a trick question.
It's a trick question.
The answer is some, because we don't know, but some would. And how many would get really angry and go into a rage? And the answer is actually the same, some. There's no percentage because we don't know. But how many would laugh and not take it seriously? And the answer again is some. And how many would be not bothered? They might think, well, their stupidity is down to them, or that just because they don't agree with what I believe to be the right way, and they've done it a different way, it's like that's their fault. That's nothing to do with me. So some might be what we call nonplussed or not bothered. So why do 100 people that experience the same event all have different emotions about that event? And the answer to that question is all 100 people that experience the same event, they don't experience necessarily the same emotion because of their belief structures. It's because of their thoughts. So the Greek philosopher Epictetus, many hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, when they didn't have pens, he was chiseling on a rock, and he chiseled out this statement: it's not the events in our life that affect us, it's the thoughts that we hold about the events. And he was right. And this is what we're talking about today, that events do not make us angry. It's the thoughts that we hold about those events. And that's why the 100 people all experience different emotions like anxiety, anger, rage, nonplussed, they don't care, or even find it funny. There's some people, when someone shouts at them, they just find it amusing that the person's lost their control. Others might think, you must not shout at me. I can't cope, I can't bear it, it's awful. and therefore it proves you're no good. And they might even raise their voice, which could escalate the situation, where if you're emotionally in control of yourself, you wouldn't necessarily escalate the situation. You could de-escalate it. I want you to imagine there's a man or a woman, doesn't matter, but in this case, a man standing in a railway station, and he holds a belief. He has thoughts, and these thoughts are, I can't stand it when the train is late. I can't bear it. It's unbearable. I can't cope, and it shouldn't be late. And it proves the railway company is no good. And he's waiting there for the train. And then suddenly over the intercom comes a message. The train standing at the platform has been delayed for an hour. Now, this man has a set of beliefs that makes him storm off to the platform manager and taps him on the shoulder and says, is that right? The train is going to be an hour late? Why? And the man on the platform who works for the railway turns around and said, I'm so sorry, sir. It is an hour late. There is some delay from the previous train, but I'm sure they're working as fast as they can. This is not good enough, he says, and he storms off. As he storms off, he goes to the coffee shop and he turns to the lady in the coffee shop and he says, coffee, please. And she said, would you like milk and sugar? And he said, he returns in response, if I wanted milk and sugar, I'd ask for it. And then someone comes up to him and says, excuse me, would you mind me pushing in? Because my train is in and it's about to leave. And he said, will you wait your turn? I was here first. So he's abusive to him. And then the lady in the coffee shop then turns around and says, would you like anything else? And he says, if I wanted anything else, I'd ask for it. Grabs his coffee and storms off, probably spilling it all over himself because he's tense. Now, let's change, not the scenario, but let's change the man's thoughts. So let's go back. He's standing on the platform, but he doesn't have those strong demands, the musts, the shoulds, the have tos. Instead, he has what we call a preference belief. I prefer that the train is on time, but it doesn't mean it has to be on time. And I can cope and I can bear it. And it's not awful. It's not the end of the world. It's just inconvenient. And over the intercom, just like the last scenario, the train standing on platform, whatever, is late by 1 hour. And the man thinks to himself, oh dear, I'll get a coffee. On his way to get a coffee, he sees the platform manager and he says, I just heard the train's late. He says, yeah, sorry, sir. He says, can't be helped. There was a delay. And he says, well, I'll go and get a coffee and hopefully it'll hurry up and we'll see. So he walks to the coffee shop and he says to the lady, I'd like a coffee, please. And she said, milk and sugar. And he says, no, thank you. And she said, anything else? Yeah, get me out. I'll have a magazine. I've got an hour to kill. Might as well read something. And someone sort of runs up to the side and says, oh, sorry, my train's just in. Is it possible I could? And he goes, yeah, of course. I've got a whole hour. Go ahead. I wish you well. That and he waits patiently. And the lady said, would you like anything else? He said, no, that's fine. Just a magazine and coffee. And he goes and sits down. He doesn't spill his coffee. He just sits there. In fact, his body's quite relaxed. And he opens a magazine and he finds this article that he's interested in. Oh, I've got an hour to spend, but this is interesting. And his heart rate hasn't increased. He's not hot and sweaty and disturbed. His teeth are not clenched. And the train comes and he gets on it and he's at peace with himself. The scenarios haven't changed. The only thing that's changed are the thoughts in his head. And therefore, our dear Stoic philosopher Epictetus was right. It's not the events in our lives. It's the thoughts that we hold about the events. And this is really frustrating sometimes. I can see it on clients' faces when they realize. So, my wife doesn't make me angry, or my husband doesn't make me angry. I'm doing that to myself. That is a state of flux when they first hear that, because if you try and tell someone angry that it's not there, it's not someone else that's making them angry, it's very difficult for them to conceptualize that. But it doesn't matter how hard it is to conceptualize it, it's true nonetheless. It's still true. So we humans, we disturb ourselves often, not by what happens to us, but the thoughts we hold about what we believe should or should not happen. And these belief structures are accidentally installed into us sometimes by the people that we love the most. You know, it can be parents even, or grandparents. And when we're brought up, when we're born into a family, sometimes we can believe, oh, anger runs in our family. You know, dad's angry, and dad before him was angry, and, you know, or I'm saying dad, but it could be mom. But we believe it's almost genetic, but it's a model behavior. Anger is not a genetic disorder. It's a learned behavior. So when we're children and our parents or the people that bring us up, because we could be adopted even, or fostered, or the parents might be working parents, so the grandparents bring them up in these dual families, the children experience behaviors and attitudes, and they model them and then repeat that again. So it can happen through the generations until we change our belief structures.
I want to go back to the example of the two travelers, because I think everybody wants to be the one that, you know, is polite, he has some preferences, but not true beliefs that are gonna make their life miserable at that point. So you talk about this stereotype of anger where the individual, you know, just lose it for everything, and it, as you said, his life is really miserable. How? Because now I want to know the tools that you're using. Now we have identified what is the topic. Which tools you use? What's the analysis, and how Russell goes through anger issues, and how you map them and then decode them and then provide help?
Yeah. Well, one of the tools is rationalization. So what we do is we map, first of all, the emotion, which is easy. Usually it's anger. But it could be a number of, it could be mixed emotions, like anger, hurt. So someone could be angered by what someone did and in the way they did it. So you can get two emotions, but I won't complicate things at the moment. We've got a client who's got anger issues. So we look at what triggers them. So we'd ask the client, what situations trigger you? And then they will share what those situations are. And then what I do then is find out what their belief structures are. So they'll have unhealthy beliefs, which have rigid demands, the must, should, and have to, and they'll have certain traits. So an unhealthy belief will cause unhealthy emotions. And the beliefs that they hold will also have three other beliefs, or three derivatives, which is something called awfulizing. And awfulizing is looking at a situation and considering it to be 100% or more bad if possible. So like end of the world bad. So when someone thinks it's awful, they actually disturb their physiology. So the only thing that's really truly awful is the end of the world. That's, you know, if you look at it in the context. So if the world ceases to exist, it's awful. But people will use the term awful to explain that their meal that's been delivered to them is cold, and they'll go, oh, this is awful service. But it's actually not awful, is it? It's bad. So if we find something worse, you could say we're anti-awfulizing. We're creating but it's at least it arrived on time, and we can always heat it up. So someone that's disturbed themselves with anger, they'll have a strong must, then they'll have three derivatives: awfulizing, and then they have something called low frustration tolerance. So they will think in a certain style. I can't cope. I can't bear it. They'll say, this is unbearable. And so when they say that to themselves, it feels unbearable. And also when they're awfulizing, it feels awful as well. So it's unbearable, now it's awful. And then they go on to another level of thinking called damning. So they'll damn themselves if it's their fault, or damn another person, or globalize it and damn the world. So these are the three derivatives. So we show them, and then they will look at their own thinking style and examine it, put it under a microscope, so to speak, to see if they're thinking in that style. And they usually are. And they'll have one or two or even all three of those derivatives. Then we have to prove to them that that thinking style leads to anger, and therefore it's not healthy for them. Because what does anger actually do? Apart from make you say stupid things, it causes psychological disturbance, doesn't it? If you notice, if you've ever been angry, we're psychologically disturbed, we're tense, we're disturbed, the heart rate goes up, so we're physically disturbed as well. So there's always psychological, physical disturbance in the body, and our thoughts are irrational. Have you ever made a statement in anger? I know I have. Where I've said something, and later when my mind calmed down, I regretted it and I had to apologize. I didn't mean that. Well, that's what anger does. What's that saying? Make a speech in anger and you'll make the best speech you ever regret. And I think the more angrier we become, the more stupid we become sometimes. And there's a reason for that. And I'll talk about that later, the physiological effect, how it affects the brain. But let's go back to the thoughts. We'll map the thoughts, the unhealthy beliefs, and then we'll look at the healthier version of thoughts that would help them to become annoyed, which is the healthy version of anger. So if you're annoyed, the emotions aren't as intense, and they're not held for so long. We say in annoyance, it's transient, and yet people can be angry about something for years. So we show them the healthy way of looking at something and the belief structures. So we change the musts to preference. So I prefer that the train was late. I prefer the train was on time is a much healthier belief than it must be on time. Because if you ask yourself the question, is it rational to demand a train to be on time? And it's not actually rational, because you're not in control of the train service. So how many things are we not in control of that we enforce the law? It must happen or it must not happen. You must not shout at me. Well, I can't control your shouting. You may shout at me, you might not. But the more I believe that you mustn't do it, the more I disturb myself when it happens. So I think I prefer you not to shout at me, but it doesn't mean you will not shout at me. And then what we look at then is we show the evidence to someone with anger that their belief structure causes them psychological disturbance, physical disturbance, and it's not goal orientated. So what do I mean by that? What does not goal orientated mean? Well, it means that there are certain things that we want from life that don't happen because of our thinking style. They disrupt the very things we need. And those things are things like harmony, good relationships, to be effective at communicating, to be stable, to not scare people, to not make people frightened of us. So we have to look at the consequences of someone's actions. And if you talk to a person with anger issue or anger management issues, when they're in that calm state, they'll admit, they'll say, I don't want to be this way. It's not good for the kids. It's not good for the family. And I'm ashamed of it myself. I just get triggered and I can't control my ways, which is not true. They just are being triggered and they don't know how to think differently. So we teach them how to think differently and then teach them how to weaken the old thinking style by eroding it, by using the healthier belief structures. So that's one technique. And then the other technique we use is hypnosis, my favorite subject. So we can help to put the suggestions in to use the techniques that rationalization brings to the table, but use hypnosis to reinforce those beliefs as well. And then also there might be some coping strategies that needed to have that person to relax more because they're under stresses, general life stresses like work stresses, etc. So we'll teach them relaxation, mindfulness, and things outside the parameters of what I do, like meditation or yoga. So there are many, many techniques, but the one that I find very effective that's combined with hypnosis is rationalization. So combined usually helps the person to become more aware of their thinking styles and what triggers those thinking styles and how to change those thinking styles to their more healthier counterpart.
Because I have few athletes who are really goal oriented, and when they do a race, they didn't perform. Then they do the second race and they didn't perform for many reasons. Okay. That, in a stoic way, all things that were outside their control. Okay. So every time we train, we say, okay, control the controllable. It's valid for sport. It's valid for flying, reduce the variables, prepare. But sometimes, the guys train in 25 degrees Celsius. They go for to race when it's 35. 60% humidity. You're not in control. So they debrief me and they say, I'm really disappointed. I'm really disappointed. I was like, now I'm going to start saying this. Okay, that was your thing, your must, your should, but you must have a preference to race in a certain condition where you train. But if it doesn't happen, don't let your thoughts, vehicle your energy into negativity. And now you go into kind of depression, let's say, because now you have expectation of performances. And 2 races in a row, they didn't go well. Now, what's going to happen the next one? So, this is your preference. If it doesn't happen, it's your thoughts that you're making your life hard. That is not the reality of the things, because you've been training. You are prepared to deliver whatever is required that day. So I always tell them, am I going to be able to race in 4 hours, finish the race in 4 hours or in 5 hours? I say, I don't know. I mean, I can say that you're going to deliver the maximum for what you have trained for. So, preference. I like this idea of preference in life, because I need really to apply also to myself. I prefer this one. If it doesn't happen, I mean, we like to be the traveler that goes to the coffee shop, with a smile instead of being angry. I mean, and you said obviously this condition leads to a chronic state. A chronic state, right? So,
or can do.
Yeah. Which extent have you seen it? I mean, you have example of people that really, I mean, without making names, but when they went to a situation where really they suffer physically and mentally, almost unrecoverable. When it's chronic, is really something like, is there hope?
There's always hope. I've just got so many cases that I've worked with. One comes to mind. I remember somebody. Do you know when you see these cartoons where you get a cartoon character and they're angry and it's like this? They have a steam engine noise on it. A train letting off steam, and their ears, they're sort of whatever, if they're wearing speakers, their ears blast with steam. And there's some truth to that, actually. That's really what the cartoon is depicting, that blood pressure. So the heart is beating faster, the blood pressure is rising. And so cartoons show that happening. And also their eyes are extended on the end of stalks, where they're triggered. And there's some truth in it. I remember working with somebody that broke many of their blood vessels in their eyes, and they went blind in one eye. because of their extreme anger. And I work with them, and after I trained them in this style of changing their thoughts to more rational thoughts to reduce the anger, there was tears in their eyes. I remember, and I thought I'd upset them at the time, and I said, why are you crying? And he said, I only wish I'd have learned these thoughts and coaching styles, these techniques. I wish I'd have learned them earlier, because I think I might have saved my sight. I see a lot of people with irritable bowel syndrome, and I've had irritable bowel syndrome myself when my mother died during COVID. And it's interesting how the mind and our thoughts, when we're angry, I was angry that my mum died. I was angry that I was unable to get to the funeral because of lockdown, and my stomach stopped working. And I went to the doctors, as you do, because of my age. I thought, maybe it's something more serious. And they investigated me over a period of weeks. Cameras, were put inside me and tests. They couldn't find anything, but they did look at on an ultrascan. They saw that my digestive system wasn't working and it was stopping. Well, when we're angry, the blood in the stomach is not required. It's needed in our hands and arms to fight the attacker or run away. And so what was happening, the fight or flight response was being triggered, and my digestive system was shutting down. I wasn't able to go to the bathroom after eating, which was very uncomfortable. I received bloating, but I wasn't sure. I, like anyone, I would advise you go and see a doctor, because it might be something else. But when he told me it's IBS, I did have to smile, because I work with IBS and I didn't realize that I was actually suffering through my thoughts about my mom, So I use the techniques to help me through that very difficult period of my life. Luckily, I knew these techniques, so I could self-treat. But at first, it was very uncomfortable. I'm glad I went through IBS, actually, because I help a lot of people with this condition. And I think just experiencing it and how it affects our lives, it wasn't a bad thing. It gave me an insight into the condition. But it's interesting how our thoughts can disturb our mind. In this instance, it interferes with the enteric nervous system that steers the gut. And so when we're frightened, sometimes our gut can work too quickly. And that's when we can experience things like diarrhea. With IBS, you can get diarrhea and bloating and constipation alternating, because our emotions are very much linked to our digestive system.
Tools of the Humans. This is your contemporary podcast where you will learn how humans face challenges. Everybody has a story to tell. Listening is knowledge. Let us know if you're interested in sharing your story or if you know somebody who wants to tell theirs. The show is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So there is a word of wisdom for those who find themselves fighting with anger and are not able to capitalize basically their efforts and their potential in any situation. You were talking a lot about children. Okay, this is a very deep topic, I think, because they are future generations. They are the people that are suffering from our code of contacts, and they are creating their own. And it's not genetic, but you're creating the same schemes, the same pattern. So when you're approaching adults, you are able to rationalize situations. What about the children? Because you're an adult and you're talking to a different mind structure, let's say.
Yeah, true. Parents will often bring in their children who've got anger issues, which themselves have and they don't realize that they've modeled the behavior. So sometimes we're working with the parents and the child. And again, with the child, their anger issues we have to still go through the same process. We just use slightly different words and language and tailor it to their age. But their anger issues will be around similar things. I absolutely must get an A in my exams. If I don't, I'm a failure, I'm no good. They can be angry with themselves, or they can get angry about not being able to spend hours on their gaming machines. And so they can get angry. I know children that grow up and they're sort of in their teens, they physically manhandled their moms, which is not, it's not good. So they have strong musts, shoulds, and have to. So you do have to rationalize with them as well. With younger children, when they're developing, they can be taught also how to manage those emotions, how to let go of those emotions, because it's very frustrating for an 8-year-old who's, really aggressive. And you sometimes see these children, they'll smash up their room and they'll act out because they don't know where to put this anger. Whereas an adult can, as you say, they're brighter, they're more experienced. They can be trained easier, but children can be trained. But we also have to teach the parents a lot of the time how to teach them to walk away. One of the best pieces of advice I ever give children and parents is never make a speech in anger. Learn to zip it and just explain, I'm angry right now. I've done this with my own family. I'm angry right now with you. And so it's best that we both walk away. And we'll come back to this. We'll talk about it over dinner. But I think you should go to your room and I'll go to mine. And let's talk about this later when we're both calm. And it's something, I'm going to switch back to your sports people, because there's something that you said that I didn't mention. But here's some advice, and I say this with the greatest respect. When your people that you're coaching are making statements like that immediately after a run where it hasn't gone to plan or they haven't performed to their expectation, and they want to talk about it, I would say the best advice is the same advice I'd give there. Say, don't give them advice necessarily when they're emotional. Just say to them, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
But
we're going to debrief later. Let's
do it later, because I've got this story that if you go up to a man who's smashing up carrefours and throwing cans of beans everywhere, and you try and go up to him and rationalize with him and say, but you know what, that's making a mess, you're likely to get a can of beans on your head. So there's no point in communicating with someone when they're upset. So I would say that to you, and you probably do anyway, but I'd say,
true.
Let's just say, let's talk about this later.
Yeah.
And
this one,
they're more rational then, and then it's easier, because what happens is when we're angry, when we're emotional, the left side of the brain shuts down, and that is helpful when we're in danger. So our primitive ancestors, when they were confronted with bigger, stronger tribes, then it wouldn't pay them, the smaller tribe, to be logical. So it's useful to shut that brain down, and they will face the danger. They become, the more angrier you become, the more braver you become. And so this trait is in our genetics, the left brain shutting down. And it doesn't matter if you're in front of your child and you're pointing fingers and staring at them and telling them off, and trying to communicate a message. Yeah, it's pretty scary. An adult, staring down at a child with their finger in their face, it's very scary. And that child's brain, their left brain, will shut down. So you're wasting your breath. Don't communicate with your child when you're angry. Wait and talk to them in a lower tone. Honey, darling, I'm very upset with you right now, and we're going to talk about this later, and walk away. And then when you calm down, your left brain comes online again, and so does theirs. And then you can communicate what the message that you want to communicate effectively. And it's the same with your people when they've run a race and they're angry with themselves. Don't bother talking to them. Say, go and get showered, get changed. I haven't forgotten what you said. I've got plenty to talk about, but let's do it later. And when their left brain then comes back online, they can take everything you said more logically and understand it. Because if you say it there and then, they're not necessarily listening to you. They're still going, yeah, but I should have done it this way and I should have done it that way. They're too busy talking to themselves. So it crosses boundaries, doesn't it? It's not just children or athletes or families.
No. And also pilots, and also pilot training. I'm going to give you this example because it supports what you said. I'm flying with the students and I have great expectation on his performance. We go in flying and his mission is rubbish. Like, he's not in control of the maneuvers. I have to intervene. And, like, this guy should have been the first of the class. You are proud of it. Like, there are different instructors at the squadron. You want to have the best student. I created this one. Oh, this student comes in as clay. You create him. You help him out. Mission is disaster. So you come back. You are angry. Like, you are going to fail this guy. You definitely are going to fail it. Okay, let's cool down for a minute. Put your hands in the eyes. Let's reload the tape of the airplane. Let's give it 30 minutes. Then we're going to go do the briefing. Don't take a decision right away. Don't like exteriorize your frustration right away. Let's see, because maybe, also for the instructor, there are many things to evaluate, like maybe I didn't consider the variables that were there and I couldn't process in the moment that I was, evaluating him too harsh. Come back, you do the debriefing. Then you start like, well, it was not so bad. It wasn't excellent, but it was not so bad. So I've learned this a lot, as you said. And as soon as the athletes come back, okay, let's debrief when you come back to Dubai. Let's debrief when you're home, because now you change a little bit the perception of things, and now you go into the preference mode much more than it should have been like this. Because in the moment, especially in a risky business like pilot training, you need to protect yourself. You cannot look at too many variables. You're looking at main things. And so if those main goals are not achieved, the risk is like to go, okay, must, should, now, failure, wait, evaluate. I really love the idea of, okay, let's not talk today. Let's talk later. Let's not talk now. Let's talk later when everybody comes down. This is I think, a great tool that parenting, and it works probably also in business, in work environment. If you're arguing with your the people that are working too, maybe the moment it's better not to stop for a moment and say, okay, let's discuss this tomorrow. Like, instead of building.
How many managers, effective managers, who have a great reputation, then lose it to anger and then go and act out with a member of their employee, say something that they later regret, and for the rest of that employee's life, they remember that one thing, and you might have lost everything you've built up. So it crosses boundaries, whether it's children or pilots or athletes or business people. You make a speech in anger, and you'll make the best speech you ever regret. So it's best to just walk away. So to allow your psychology, your mind, to come back online, because when we're angry, we personalize things. We feel it's personal. When we're calmer, we see clearer. But it comes from our ancestors. It's a useful tool to have the left brain shut down in times when we're in danger. But these days, we're very rarely in danger. Maybe not so in your profession in flying jets, but very rarely in danger. So it's usually our ego's in danger, or someone's, not done things to our rule book, and then we can become foolish and look foolish. Many clients I work with who are in managerial positions, and they've come in and said, well, something happened yesterday at work, and I lost it, and I've got to face that, but I've got an issue, So yeah, hold off, come back online, let the left brain take time to recover, and then you can think it through. Whenever I've got anything going on in life, I've got to fire an email, an uncomfortable email, I never send it that day. I might type it that day. I've done this so many times. Typed out an email where something's happened where I needed it to be different, and I've said, don't send that email, sleep on it. And I've slept on it, read it through, and said, I'm not sending that, rewrote the whole thing. Completely different correspondence and message once my left brain hemisphere has calmed down. And sometimes I even see it's my fault, not their fault. And I rationalize, I prefer that things went a certain way, but it doesn't mean they will. And it's not awful. I can cope. And it's not the end of the world, It's really interesting when, when we think something's awful, I can't cope. I usually express this in this way. If I put you into a bonfire, into a flaming bonfire, you could scream out in pain and say, I can't cope. Your skin would be peeling, your eyes would be popping out, you're on fire, your head would be singeing, and you have every right to say, I can't cope. I get that. And I'd say, come off the fire, get off there, or you'd be jumping off there. But when people say, I can't cope with things like the way someone speaks to you, for instance, they exaggerate the emotions in the body. They trick their own psychology and physiology to react at a more extreme level, because they're saying to themselves, I can't cope. Where actually if they said, I can cope, badly perhaps, but I am coping, then our physiology changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When we say I can't cope, I can't take this, then we don't take it. There's no coping strategy. It's as soon as we say I can cope with this, then we accept that we can cope with it, and the physiology calms down and our thoughts calm down. And all it is words that transfer into the mind and then into the body, and then the heart rate calms down. People that disturb themselves are usually saying they can't cope, they can't bear it, and it's terrible. And then they overreact to a situation, and later on they're like, oh dear, I think I overreacted there, but it's too late. When you talk to people in anger, it's not very nice for the people receiving it. It's usually frightens people.
Isn't it a way that you're talking to yourself, which is different? I can cope. Like, for example, for pilots, you never say don't fly slow, because otherwise people are gonna fly slow. Oh my God, I don't have to fly slow. They fly slow. You say fly fast.
Yes.
Don't fly 140 knots. Fly 160. So the mind is processing in different ways, in a positive way. So it's a way to help yourself also for anger. Don't do. React.
Yeah, well, in the training, there has to be a moment where the person has these tools, and they can still lose it to anger with all the tools. They have to apply the tools. So it's a case of actually them saying, hey, I'm getting angry right now. So what do I do? What's making me angry? What's my must? What's my should? What's my have to? And changing it to preference. Walking away. Create a distance. Hey, I'm getting emotionally charged right now in a negative way. I'm angry. Walk away. And once you walk away, you might still be angry, but you create that distance. You're not going to say anything to that person or react to that person. I'm going to go for a walk. I need to calm down. And then start to apply the tools. So create what parents do, interestingly, they sometimes mistakenly think they've got to have the last word. So when the child's cheeky, they go, what did you say? And they're back in the room. And actually, and we must talk about this in another time, but the child's actually gaining control over the parent, because the parent sort of says, don't do that, and then goes out the room. And as they're walking out the bedroom, the child goes, yeah, but I only hit my brother because he punched me. And then you walk back in. Well, it's almost like he's saying, I haven't finished with you yet, Dad. Now that puts them in control. Whereas if you finish saying what you've got to say and that you're not happy with it, it's much better to create a distance, to create a vacuum. And if whatever they say, you can just ignore it. It's not important. You've said what you've said. You've told them what you want to change, the behavioural change, but they pull you back in. And parents think they've always got to have the last word. And it's not true. They don't need to. They can just say what they meant and then walk away. Because if you don't do that, the child feels empowered. And there's nothing worse for the child that feels that you're equal, like equal to the parents. They're not. Parents have to have the rules and enforce those rules to their children. It's a big mistake that the parents do. They feel that the last word should be said by them, and it's not necessary. But it doesn't mean that the child's words are valid. It actually invalidates them. And when you constantly do that, you can actually develop a defiant child from this. They can practice being defiant. So when they're 16, 17, they're like, no, I'm not going to do what you want to do. They empower themselves from it. Very interesting communication with parents and children.
Thank you, Russell. That was fascinating as always. But we have run out of time. Until the next episode. Ciao.
Take care.